We are saying that actually we're damaging our mental well-being.
Kids nowadays spend a lot of their times in front of a computer. Incidence of childhood obesity has been skyrocketing. Just think in terms of like candy. Just because a kid wants candy doesn't mean you give it to them when they want it. For example, looking at blue light at night suppresses your pineal gland's secretion of melatonin. So, you know where most of the serotonin in the body is? In the gut. Inflammation in your gut makes inflammation in your brain. And fiber is critically important for the manufacture of very positive and important bacteria in your gut.
Welcome to Clinics, your dedicated space for exploring the vital connections that shape your well-being. Here we dive into everything from achieving peak physical fitness by mastering sustainable weight management to optimizing your diet for a vibrant life. We're passionate about uncovering the power interplay between your mental and physical health, offering you insightful strategies to nurture both. Join us as we unlock the secrets to embark on your self-confidence and your inspiration by interviewing the top-rated personalities, not from only the US, but around the world. At Clinics, our commitment is to bring you evidence-based information that inspires you confidently control your health journey and live your life to the absolute fullness. I'm your host, Amir Khan. Let's get ready to unlock the true potential of being a human with the most amazing people around us. So, considering the youth that are so hooked up to games, they're hooked up to this social media, and exercise or playing games or going out and doing those social activities as teamwork or is fast diminishing, is going down drastically. We are saying that actually we're damaging our mental well-being. What recommendation would you give to our youth right now, or what tips, or what would you suggest? And what does the science, first of all, say about it? Because I'm just stuck on E. Forget about education, diet, and sleep. We're going to touch on those topics afterwards, but exercise.
Well, you know, when I think about my childhood, and I would imagine, Dr. Khan, you think about your childhood, we spent a lot of time running around the neighborhood, playing tag, doing all sorts of things. And you mentioned that kids nowadays spend a lot of their times in front of a computer playing maybe multiple user games or whatever, computer games. And we know that since 1980, the incidence of childhood obesity has been skyrocketing, especially during the last 15 to 20 years. So I do think that parents hold a very, very clear responsibility in limiting the amount of computer use. I know that we like to be egalitarian and we'd like to support our kids and give them, things that they want and everything else, but we are responsible for helping them learn healthy lifestyles. So it seems to me, I'm a parent. I would imagine, Dr. Khan, you're a parent as well, are you?
Yes,
and so
that's where the problem is stemming from, because the kids are so hooked up, and there's always one or two of them that are more than the other. It's hard.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's, just think in terms of like candy. Just because a kid wants candy doesn't mean you give it to them when they want it, because they'll want even more. And so it's an addictive. There's multiple studies throughout the world now actually demonstrating that computer use is addictive. Our iPhones or drones or whatever, well, it's addictive. We're on there constantly, and so that addiction has to be addressed, just like eating bad food or candy or whatever. So our job as parents basically is to help our children, help our kids uh, be able to learn healthy lifestyles early on and limit computer use and cell phone use. Now that sounds rather drastic to a lot of people because some people
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you don't want to do that because you're being too rigid and all that."
Mm.
No, part of learning how to live uh, requires a family environment that teaches you how to live, and that's our responsibility.
Dr. Arden, is there a number on how much time you should be spending with a computer or an iPhone, and after which we know it is going to definitely damage your brain? It is going to affect your mental well being. Or would you say, no, it varies? It's going to be dependent on what is the time that what's the time you're spending when you're off the computer, or is it dependent on genetics? Or is that going to play a role?
Well, that's a very interesting question that has been debated throughout the last 15 years. And in fact, it's so much so that even your iPhone tells you how much computer screen time that you've had on your computer. But let's put this in a larger perspective because we know that now school requires some computer use, generally speaking. In other words, you're doing Google searches, you're using Google Scholar, you're working on your computer on a Word doc or whatever. Then you send the document, depending on what grade level you're in and everything else. So if you take that in consideration and then you try to carve out how much time a person is using on social media, that's a difficult management issue here. So let's take computer use and just say, well, that's a broad area, and carve out the social media aspect. Now, we do know, for example, that what time you do the computer or the cell phone or the iPad or whatever actually has an effect on other biophysiological factors, not just your brain, but also whether or not your body's going to be able to sleep at night. For example, looking at blue light at night suppresses your pineal gland's secretion of melatonin. So, in other words, looking at your iPhone at night on a computer screen actually gives you insomnia biochemically. So, what time you use these devices is also a factor. So you see how complicated this is in many ways. And
Absolutely.
so I would think that in general, our job as parents for the kids, and generally I'm thinking of 8 and up, to work with our children around when they can, and meaning not after dinner, for example. They're going
Sure.
to think that's pretty stark.
Uh-huh.
But also only if you get your homework done
True.
because you don't want to do it beforehand. So, in other words, you're carving in behaviors that need to be done before. So, in other words, you get dessert after a nice meal or whatever. Hopefully, not every night, but still, that you don't get the dessert before the meal, so to speak. And then you limit the amount of the dessert. In this case, we're talking social media and everything else. So you see how I think it's more of a complicated question about there being an exact time to do it. But I think in many ways, a ballpark before dinner is, boy, if you're going over 2 hours of social media, that's a heck of a lot of time.
Gotcha. I think that's a good suggestion. And I like the fact that you're putting in you're making sure that the breaks are there. So for example, if it's lunch, you got to take your lunch. If it's dinner, take your dinner properly. Then at night you should not be using it because it's going to affect your sleep, and that's detrimental for your brain. It's not rested. You're not going to build new cells. You're not going to be able to memorize things properly, and that has a catastrophic effect. So computers are not good. And you're strategically putting in diet as part of it, which is one of your seeds, the D in it. We know diet plays an important role in our lives, and you already mentioned how obese the general population is in it, but does it have any effects on your mental well-being? I know it would if you're obese, you're depressed more, or say, for example, if you're going to be active less, but diet directly having effect on your mental well-being and genes? Would that be a
Absolutely.
correlation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this new field called nutritional neuroscience is both fascinating and needs to be brought down to earth. And there are many really cogent authors out there who have written some really accessible books. And in fact, there's one book that is by a physician who I think he's a GI doc that wrote a book called Your Brain on Food. Wonderful book. And it brings it all down to earth. So let me explain some of the issues related to diet and brain function. So the neurotransmitters that we use, that our neurons use to communicate with one another, we have neurotransmitters, neuromodulators. This is basically brain chemistry. Well, it's not immaculately conceived. These brain chemicals don't come out of nowhere. They're made by your body via the precursor amino acids that you take into your sleep. Let's take one well-known neurotransmitter called serotonin. Well, serotonin isn't made by Prozac or any of those medications. Serotonin is made by the precursor amino acid called L-tryptophan. So if you don't have enough L-tryptophan in your diet, you will not have enough serotonin in your body because it's synthesized into serotonin. In fact, researchers at Arizona State University limited the amount rather, of tryptophan in the diet to show that people who have this restriction of tryptophan have lower serotonin in their body and their brain. And here's a direct brain effect. There's a tremendous number of serotonin receptors in the prefrontal cortex. You mentioned it earlier. And this is the part of the brain that gives you the capacity to make decisions, to control your emotions, and all that. So limiting the amount of tryptophan in your diet, which limits the amount of serotonin in your body and your brain, makes you less likely to make good decisions and less likely to control your emotions. Now, serotonin is one of the many cornucopia neurochemicals in your entire body. So every one of these things, acetylcholine and dopamine and GABA and glutamine, they're all made via the food that you eat. And that food then makes the neurochemistry so your body, I keep addressing the body because the brain's part of the body, but you know where most of the serotonin in the body is? In the gut. So your gut is like sometimes called the second brain. So your gut chemistry has a major effect on the way that your brain operates as well. And we know through a lot of very fascinating research in immunology that inflammation in your gut makes inflammation in your brain. There's an inflammation highway, you could say, through your vagus and a number of other pathways. So there are many different types of brain cells. We have neurons and we have all these glial cells. Well, some of the glial cells in your brain respond to inflammation anywhere in your body. You have inflammation in your gut, you're going to have inflammation in your brain, which means you're going to have cloudy thinking, and you're not going to be able to have a positive mood. Here's a food issue again, because we have an inflammatory diet. We eat too many simple carbohydrates, meaning white flour, sugar, high
Yeah,
fructose
we're
corn
going to
syrup,
come
and
to
all
that.
that.
That was going to be my exact next question because you mentioned dopamine, you mentioned serotonin, you mentioned glutamine. All of these are amino acid derivatives. Where is the starch? How much do you need? And is diet that big of a part? So we've had guests in our show talking about proteins and some on being on carnivorous diet. A lot of them want to go into ketosis and limit the carbs that they're eating, but you're making a direct association with say, yes, I think you have to do that because a lot of protein is required, But yes, some starch is also required for your functioning, for your glucose metabolism, for your energy. And it's more like making sure that you have enough amino acids to produce these hormones in your body, because they're all, a lot of them are protein derivatives.
Right. And in fact, this conversion that you're addressing right now, where you have the amino acids, which include the complex carbohydrates, provide also the glucose available for your cells. And specifically, I'm thinking of the energy factories in all cells, which are called mitochondria. Many people get intimidated by that big term. So I just call them mitos because they're mighty. So you have every one of your cells in your body have hundreds of these little mitos. And your brain, which is the highest energy consumer in your body, along with your heart and your liver, uh, need a lot of these mitos to function properly. So that means you need a certain amount, a good balance of glucose. Well, where do you get that? Well, you get that from the food that you're eating. However, you can blow out the mitos by eating too much simple carbohydrates and sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and all that. So, what we find with a balanced diet, and I'm now talking about not overdoing it with your calories. In other words, you periodically go through a little bit of calorie restriction, which is actually a good longevity behavior. But if you have a balanced diet, then you have enough fuel for the mitos to produce the power, adenosyl triphosphate, which you could just say is all that power, right? To bring it down to earth again. You got mitos, you got all that power. You need to have a diet that gives your mitos the ability to make all that power. And so a balanced diet, and we could call that the Mediterranean diet, which isn't too much of this simple carbohydrates and, you know, sugary drinks and everything else, gives your mitos the opportunity to make all that power. And without that balanced diet, you're running on empty. And so you mentioned earlier this paleo diet, which is kind of a fad out there right now. And I think there's an oversimplification out there in the general public about what that might be. There's some very, very easy, accessible books out there by perhaps colleagues of yours on the GI system and diet, and what our ancestors, who were hunter-gatherers, prior to 11,000 years ago, were consuming. Well, they weren't eating all meat and no carbos. They were eating tubulars and high fibrous foods. The difference between our diet and theirs in many ways is we don't have enough fiber in our diets. And fiber is critically important for the manufacture of very positive and important bacteria in your gut. So we have a lot of bacteria in our gut. We just want to have a good balance, more Bacteroides than the Firmicutes, because we have less inflammation. So again, it's almost a circular description here. Bad diet, inflammation. Bad functioning of your brain. Good diet, less inflammation, but also good manufacture of this neurochemistry, and also enough fuel for your mitos to produce all that power. So diet is really all about whether or not you're going to be able to not only live, but think clearly and have balanced moods.
Dr. Horton, you mentioned a little bit about our ancestors, and a lot of people talking about carnivorous diet, which is very much in fashion right now. A lot of people deploy it. You think it's not, doesn't have enough fiber? Is that where the little criticism is on it?
I
Is
think
that
so. Yes, there's. I don't remember the author, but this wonderful book called Burn by a. You might want to invite him to be interviewed. I think he brings everything down to earth. What he did as a researcher in metabolism in general. In fact, if you and I share an email, I'll send you his name and everything.
please?
But basically he went around the world looking at what remains of hunter-gatherers now, because we were all hunter-gatherers until about 11,000 years ago. However, there aren't that many left. Let's say the Kalahari Desert, a few in the Amazon area, not much in the Arctic, but people in the popular literature have over exaggerated the Arctic adaptation, which meant, less fiber, more animal protein. Well, I'm not saying animal protein isn't necessarily good, but what I am saying is it turns out that the paleo diet is high fiber, and high fiber is really important for gut metabolism and gut bacteria. And so fiber not only produces the right kind of gut bacteria, but also makes it possible to metabolize all these precursor amino acids that make the neurotransmitters and all that. I'm not saying protein and ketosis and a number of other factors aren't important. Absolutely they are. No question about it. So it's not an either or kind of thing. I'm not saying don't eat meat, even though my meat consumption is relatively low, because I think it's better to minimize animal products that have been given all sorts of chemicals, including antibiotics and hormones to make them fatter and everything else. I think that's all pretty destructive to the brain too, as well as high levels of saturated fat. Not really positive for your brain either.
Yeah, we had Dr. David Burns on our show, and that's what he talked about. You're right.
Oh, very good. Excellent. I'll have to look for that. I'll look for that in your podcast.
Yes, and he did talk a lot about this. What a remarkable journey we've just experienced together. The path to health isn't always straight, but it's always worth the effort. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take the next step in your wellness journey, armed with new knowledge and a fresh perspective. If today's episode left you inspired, share it with someone who need to hear this. Give us a thumbs up and your opinion. Keep exploring, keep evolving, and we'll see you in the next episode of Clinics.